Precaglia.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I refer members to my register of interests. I want to start with a small tribute. In the weeks before he died, exempt accommodation was one of the last campaigns I was working on with my dear friend, the Honourable Member for Birmingham Erdington, the late Jack Dromey. Parts of Stockland Green in his constituency had been saturated with HMO-style exempt conversions and caused serious issues with crime and community unrest. Jack spent his career fighting to improve the lives of his constituents in Erdington. Sorting out the scandal of exempt accommodation was the kind of campaign he lived and breathed. That's why, working with his local inspector, he was able to get an extra 24 officers deployed to Stockland Green to address the antisocial behaviour and crime associated with some of this transient accommodation. All of us have lost a great champion with his passing, but for his sake and for the people of Erdington, it's so important that we fix this issue once and for all. Birmingham has the most units of non-commissioned exempt accommodation in the country, with some 20,000 units and more than 4,000 properties registered as exempt. As we have heard in this debate, safety and quality concerns are widespread. Several of my city's largest providers have been issued regulatory notices by the regulator for social housing, for finance and governance issues. Hundreds of exempt properties in our city have been found to be unsafe, and for this, literally millions of pounds of taxpayers' money is being shoveled to the operators of these properties without apparent due diligence or scrutiny. And over the past few years, I have worked closely with providers, residents, the police, the sector and community groups to get to the bottom of why this sector has doubled in our city in just a few years and why so much of this accommodation is substandard and badly managed. I have had first-hand experience of dealing with this myself in the case of Safe Lodge in my constituency. I was aware of some of the issues at Safe Lodge for some time since I was elected, but after my constituents alerted me to the shocking rise of crime surrounding this property, I carried out a spot check to see for myself what was going on and was shocked by what I found. 25 men and women, including ex-offenders, housed with severe issues ranging from addiction and substance misuse, mental health problems. Just one solitary support worker was on duty, who told me the hostel was only manned on weekdays, with residents otherwise left to their own devices. The conditions were utterly substandard, cold, filthy and cramped. The downstairs toilet had broken and flooded and been left unfixed. The smell was hair-raising. Access to the property was via a code which was regularly shared with strangers who were in and out of the property. Communal spaces were in a horrible state. It was no wonder residents were frequently found spilling out and loitering outside. This was not a place any of us could happily live, let alone get a life back on track following a crisis. I have to commend my local community, especially the residents on Fountain Road, Birmingham City Council, its leader, Ian Ward, and West Midlands Police, including my local inspector, Lee Trinder, and Sergeant Bushra Zarif, who have been absolutely brilliant working with me on this campaign. And Jane Haynes from Birmingham Live, who's been diligent in raising awareness of this issue for many, many years. Over many, many months, we were able to gather the evidence we needed and take this case to court. And finally, last year, we succeeded in shutting Safe Lodge down, the first order of its kind in the country. This was a great achievement, but there can be no doubt, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is not evidence of a system that is working. The resources from police and ambulance call-outs and the misery inflicted on residents and the community alike has been immense. We can't shut down every Safe Lodge. There are far too many. And shutting down Safe Lodge did not stop the same people setting up another exempt property in another constituency down the road. As the member for Birmingham Ladywood so passionately stated, actually it was in her constituency that they went and reopened another property. Which brings me to the need for reform. Bad landlords are exploiting this system for a profit while our communities and vulnerable people pay the price. I say to the government today, care cannot be provided on the cheap. Last year, Birmingham City Council inspected over 400 exempt properties in which they found over 1,000 Category 1 hazards that posed a serious and immediate risk to a person's health and safety. And as part of these inspections, the Council found a further 600 Category 2 hazards, which include fire safety issues, asbestos and excessive heat or cold. This is from just a fraction of our stock in Birmingham. And of the 21,317 exempt accommodation properties identified by Birmingham City Council as part of its investigation, around 20,000 are not commissioned by the local authority. So landlords who apply for registered provider status seek referrals for vulnerable people beyond the city's boundaries, bringing people with support needs to Birmingham where they are remote from their own natural support networks. And the truth is that too many bad landlords are getting into this sector for the very wrong reasons. They're exploiting a toxic cocktail of under-regulation, a conservative housing crisis and an epidemic of unmet need after years of council cuts. And there are good providers, there are even brilliant ones operating in Birmingham who are actually trying to do the right thing, but there is a growing underbelly too, as we've heard today. And the definitions of what support residents receive in exchange for these higher rents is far too vague and open to exploitation. In fact, there is no statutory definition at all. The ambit of the social housing regulator is too narrow, it's too passive to pick up the exploiters. It's don't ask, don't tell policy to only look at providers with more than 1,000 units of exempt has become a loophole for exploiters. And our local authorities just don't have the powers or resources to crack down on antisocial behaviour and the oversupply of exempt in certain areas. I've talked to the campaign groups working on this in our city, and whole roads of family homes are being converted into HMOs to cash in on the high levels of rent that these properties can yield. People are gaming the system and making money off the backs of vulnerable people, and this government has put off the job of reform for far too long. But exempt accommodation cannot mean exempt from responsibility. And that's why it's important to note that there is no statutory definition of what care, support or supervision is in the context of exempt accommodation, because landlords are getting away with providing either nothing or variable ad hoc support to those that need it most. And since previously mooted reforms of the supported housing system were shelved in 2018, the exempt accommodation sector has grown by 62% across the UK and is now worth over £1 billion. And yet in November at an APPG on Ending Homelessness event, the Minister's team said they were too light on data to get on with reform. In recent years, we've had reports from Prospect Supported Housing, Spring Housing, policy recommendations from Crisis, Commonweal and Birmingham City Council. In 2017, the independent chair of the Birmingham Adult Safeguarding Board commissioned a study into the experiences of vulnerable adults living within exempt accommodation, and the findings highlighted issues relating to poor quality of accommodation, variable experiences of the quality of support provided and risk management processes. And in 2019, a report commissioned by Commonwealth Housing set out the issues clearly, concluding that non-commissioned exempt subsector embodies a range of social injustices, the most salient of which are the risk of social harm, absence of use of voice, and barriers to employment and social integration. And with several pilots, reports from multiple community groups, all are pointing in the same direction, yet the government has failed to publish its findings of the pilots or even act on the recommendations above. Lives are literally at stake here. Survivors of domestic violence, prison leavers, care leavers, people with mental health and substance abuse issues deserve a supported housing system that supports their transition to happier, more independent lives. Our communities in Birmingham deserve neighbourhoods that are peaceful and safe, not a magnet for crime. And the taxpayer deserves to know that their money is going to support people who need it, not lining the pockets of criminals. Enough is enough. We need a statutory definition of the care, support and supervision, resources for local authorities to fund inspection programmes for exempt in their region, and ensure individuals and families housing exempt actually have a link to the area that they are placed. We need to give local authorities and the social housing regulator greater enforcement powers and strengthen the vetting process. And as Birmingham's call for government to align the existing planning and HMO licensing policies to capture supported housing provision that is currently exempt and give local authorities powers to reject applications in a specific area on the grounds of oversupply. Our communities want action now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ruth Cadbury.